So then we are back with the modern understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. As per Yeshayahu the prophet, we find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Mashiach laid waste for many centuries. As we read it in Yeshayahu the prophet, why then the Hamashiach ben Yosef made mention so many times of this great prophet, and why then, for instance, in the 22nd chapter of Matthew, why there are so many troubles with the translation of the original manuscripts. So then let's give a few examples of these many troubles related with the translation of the Holy Instructions. And some of these then, for instance, is found in the verse related with the topic of hypocrites. What is then a hypocrite? Now that's a Greco term. So when the Hamashiach ben Yosef was explaining the situation regarding taxes, the Hamashiach ben Yosef was then brought in the midst of the authorities of his time, and they asked him if it was proper for the people to pay taxes. And the translation states hypocrites. So then, was this term used during the time of the Hamashiach ben Yosef? The answer is no. People, they spend not much time study the scripture for the salvation of their souls. Now, this world, in its pleasure, in its duties, they are going to sometime be destroyed. Now the soul, as then Shaliach Shimon has said, a person should be concerned with the salvation of his, or obviously her, soul. Now when the people are reading these translation, they think that the divine has transferred its power and its dominance and its understandings from the Hebrew to the Greco translation or other translations. So when they read the translated scripture, they don't relate with some of these words. Hypocrite is not the term used by the Hamashiach ben Yosef. In fact, this term was used in theaters many centuries later. So then, the Hamashiach ben Yosef explained that this world is obviously set for destruction at the end, but the words of the divine must be completed. So then, that's one of them. The second situation is from the viewpoint, it's very secular. It's not a point that is divine. Yohanan and the island of Patmos. And then once again, people, they read the translation and they are thinking that there is a transfer of divine teachings, and these divine teachings, they do not respect the character or the instructions of Yahweh, or then Yod He Vav He. The island of Patmos. There is a cave there where there are lots of people they go and visit. Now the main point was truly the place where then Yohanan wrote Revelation or Galah. Was then Yohanan writing the Galah or Revelation? No, the revelation was given previously. Now then, with these understandings in mind, when the Hamashiach ben Yosef speaks, he is explaining sections of the prophecies related with the responsibility of each person reading and understanding these documents, because at the end, the world and everything that the world has generated is going to get burned. Our work, our dedication, our duties, the only point is going to survive is the scripture. That's why the Hamashiach ben Yosef explained the world in its pleasure, in its evils, is set for the time of the end, but the words and the instructions are then forever, because he is talking of the divine. Now, if people were as much as diligent in their work and their duties as they are in understanding the salvation of their souls, they would become more familiar with the original manuscripts. Now, some people, they go once every 7 days to some establishment and they hear a few words. Some people, they do not take any notes. For them, the scripture is not important, because either being obedient or not, they themselves have set goals thinking that they are saved, obeying or not. And they truly don't understand when the Hamashiach was talking about hypocrites. He was not talking with the person as a person that has many masks. Now, the manipulation of the manuscripts, it's simply because people have no knowledge of the holy instructions. Now, is the Hamashiach speaking with the people that were asking him, or he was talking directly with the spirits? Now, a person might say, "Oh, come on, you can speak with spirits." Be surprised. And the laws of the divine is not only for human beings. Whatsoever is in this world, whatsoever forces exists in this world, either positive or negative, each of them are bound by these instructions. Now, when a person is doing evil, and a person knows that's doing evil, that's not normal. People cannot justify their bad behaviors because they interpret as giving a bad habit. If these were so, then that's why so many people are lost. Because the holy instructions in a spiritual level is not enforced. And they make excuses for themselves. 2 Corinthians 11:4, Shaliach Shaul then is explaining that at the end of times, people would concoct for themselves teachers with itching ears, simply wanting an excuse so they can continue practices, either talking bad of people, pointing finger at people, being destructive, rather than being uplifting and encouraging. A person has a choice of either destroying others with their tongue or build them up. Now, once every 7 days, they go there and they throw up their hands in the air and they jump and they shout, and then the very next day they destroy the other people where they should be teaching them. So these instructions, it's not only for people. Any spiritual being or any person that has knowledge in any dynamic must obey the instruction. That's why the Hamashiach ben Yosef did not say hypocrites. Island of Patmos. It's amazing the number of so many church sermons. They talk so much of Revelation, and some of blunt lies, absolutely blunt lie in front of everybody, and nobody researches. And they themselves, they think, oh, because God or divine of some sort has directed that person of studying and then instructing the others. Absolutely not. In fact, try to find any scripture stating that a person is responsible for the spiritual walk of the others. You won't find it, because it was never meant to be that way. That's why then Shaliach Shaul has said at the end of times in 2 Corinthians 11:4, they would concoct for themselves, they would produce for themselves. Now, should a person become a guide, a counselor, pointing the way of a walk with the divine? Should, but they should not control your life. That's the big distinction from what's going on in the world. They take joy in placing people under their control. So then the Hamashiach ben Yosef explained many sections of the Holy Instructions. And then Yohanan, when he was in the island of Patmos, did he truly receive any new understandings from the instructions? Absolutely not. He was only reminded of what the prophets previously had shown, for instance, Enoch, Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Daniel, Ezekiel. Because the divine knew later on they would try the world in its pleasures and its vile. They would try to manipulate and change what he said. And that's precisely what the world did. So when we were reading these holy instructions, a person should be concerned with the salvation of his or her own soul. Now, the instructions explains very plainly what takes place after a person dies. Sections of it you find that Hamashiach ben Yosef himself gave the understanding very precisely of Abraham, Moses. You find examples of Eliyahu and many others. Then you find the representative of the law, Moses, and the prophets, and many other examples that were given. So people would become concerned regarding the salvation of their souls. Now, salvation is conditional. That's why there is a huge trouble in the world during this period of time, because they have concocted for themselves teachers. Try to understand, they are not talking about the scripture given by the divine. Now comes the question, is it easy to do what the divine said? The island of Patmos. What went on there for so long? Why then the scripture states in John or Yohanan wrote from the island while he was in the cave and so on and so forth? Don't people realize the history of the Roman Empire at the time and the laws that were imposed upon prisoners? But then again, when they read these translations, they concoct for themselves theories. The divine can do whatsoever he wants, independently from his orders or not. That's when they get in trouble. Because independently or not, if he said or not, if he does or not, then people can hide behind their sins. Now, Yohanan was not on the island of Patmos when he wrote a refreshment of what the prophets previously had said. He did not write anything new. Now, because what Shaliach Shaul has said, that at the end of times they would concoct for themselves teachers with itching ears. He's talking precisely of this point. But traditions for so long and so long and so long. And people get angry when they hear, because they don't believe that they themselves were deceived. Our country is extremely young. It's only a couple hundred years plus old. The East have thousands of years old. Now the scripture comes from a background that is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years old. And people cling to these translations and they don't understand. So what does it mean, for instance, the prostitute of the New Testament? Is it an actual prostitute? No, it's not a prostitute. It is a set of scripture that was twisted for so long and so badly that a person becomes drunk. That's what the point is. Shaliach Shaul in 2 Corinthians 11:4. Now there are people that they are more diligent in their work, and then there are people that are so punctilious with situations where then at the end they can't take with them. Second Corinthians 11:4. Why should we be concerned with the salvation of the soul? Now, teachings very simple of these Hebrew manuscripts, because the so known New Testament has no scripture of itself. It is amazingly people don't understand that the translation is not in line with the original. So then 2 Corinthians 11:4. Now there is obviously no condemnation, but there is a point of showing the proper path. So you can start thinking of the salvation, and it's absolutely conditional. So then, 2 Corinthians 11. And then he was saying that he must bear for a bit longer. Now, this a bit longer is explaining from the time of Shaliach Shaul until the autumn feast. Now, at least a couple thousand years has gone by. Now, some people, they think 5 minutes, it's a bit of time. Then he's explaining, listen to him, and he's explaining regarding then the serpent that deceived Eve. This term does not even exist. Serpent is not part of what went on in the early sections of Bereshit. There is nothing to do with the serpent that deceived Eve. Now, when the people, they are mostly in the flesh, they want to understand everything as in the basis of the flesh. People have their souls dead. The soul is dead, therefore the spirit can't do much. Now, an obedient spirit teaches the flesh. Now, when the flesh then takes over the soul of the person, how can the spirit become functional? Soul and spirit, they are not the same. But again, some people are so stuck in their own ways, in hiding their sins and, unconditional love and those kinds of things. There are points in our lives that we should be more concerned in understanding the original manuscripts, because the world is going through a very tremendous transitions. So then, there is nothing to do with the serpent deceived Eve and Eve then eating a fruit. Those are analogies that were given later on by the fathers of the church. Simply means literary activity. Now, the Bible translation is repleted with myths. Some of them are true, Some of them are analogies. It must be interpreted with the proper content of the period of the time where the scripture was then recorded. "40 days in the desert." Was it 40 days or 40 years? No, 40 years in the desert. Why would then the divine would put the people through 40 years in the desert? And then, not only this, you have wafers raining down from heaven, where then the very divine said humans, they must gather, prepare the soil, plant, and then harvest. So that's why then when Shaliach Shaul is explaining, I say this, "But if he that comes to you had proclaimed to you another Hamashiach, whom we have not proclaimed." He's explaining what Shaliach Shaul is explaining as far as these people concocting for themselves teachers of their own. Now, your work is not going to save your soul at the end. We are doing things for our own survival and our own responsibilities, but it's not responsibilities before the divine. It's not going to save your soul. What saves the soul is the instructions, is the sect of these instructions. Or if you had received another spirit, and obviously a spirit that does not teach the principles of the divine. Now, the spiritual understanding of the manna coming from heaven is not the raining of the wafers. But then again, people, they have bad practices, bad habits, sexual dirty habits. Oh, they want to hide. Because if you have a husband or wife, then you can do whatever you want. Not quite. There are some portions of the life of a couple that should never be practiced. And in fact, it's an abomination. A lot of things that the Gentile people do. But then the understanding is unconditional, doing or not, you are saved anyway. So what is Shaliach Shaul saying? Or if any person teaches another sect of instructions, so then the manna, did it rain from heaven? Like flakes of snow that comes down and, lands on the sand. If you believe this kind of a story, then you are stupid. Does it not the divine stated how to prepare the soil, how to gather, how to plant, how to water? And then people throw up their hands in the air and shout and sing. They don't understand. No section of these holy instructions can go against its own nature. That's the understanding of being drunk. So they gather the entire scripture in a period of the New Testament. They make a salad out of it. A mixture of lies and spiritual junk. That's what Yohanan is explaining. A prostitute with the wine of perdition simply means the instructions being so much twisted in people who are drinking from it, as if a person was drinking a regular alcohol and being drunk. In a spiritual state, it's what it is. And in a lot of places they talk of ridiculous things and people believe it. So was truly the manna that rained from heaven. And the wife of Lot, glanced back and she became a column of salt. A divine that maintains a portion of his holy instructions intact, and then in the period of the 1,000 years, then whatsoever he did, he can scandalize the whole thing. Yet those who believe, they are saved anyway. Only explaining the situation, a person already perceives that it truly doesn't line up, does it? This truly is sound teaching. A virgin that conceives. Where did they get this from? A virgin that conceives. Never saw these in my entire life. I never saw a couple in the history of the earth that bears child without a contact from husband and wife as intended by the divine. And then the solar power and in the heavens, in the scripture, in the translated scripture, stated that the sun halted for a time. I never saw this. Now, when teaching these holy instructions in purely instructed, a person already has a line. Well, maybe what we believed for so long wasn't true. There are some words in Hebrew that they cannot be exchanged. Now, what does it mean? And the divine removed the reproach from Miriam. What does it mean? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. They continue on with their dirty lifestyles and, believe whatsoever comes, and you are saved anyway. And people have the nerve to say, oh, if the Hamashiach would come today, everybody would become obedient. Sure. They can barely understand the original manuscripts. whatsoever was explained in the Torah cannot contradict itself, or the sect of the portions of the Torah cannot contradict. The divine said a husband and wife, they are joint, that's how they conceive. That's why children comes. There is no virgin birth. It doesn't exist. The word used is Alma, not Betula. A young lady. And at this point in time, she was not a virgin. Because the point was not speaking of a virgin, is speaking of a young lady that was reproached because she could not bear children. They already had previously come together, but she couldn't conceive. The scripture itself explains. And Miriam could not bear children. How she knew this? Because she had a contact with her husband. Or there were hospitals back then that could say, oh, you can't conceive. The translation itself stated she could not bear children because she already had contact with her husband, and she tried and tried and tried and tried. She couldn't bear children. Was she a virgin? So Shaliach Shaul then is explaining that they would concoct for themselves teachers, and that's what the whole situation is. They are teachers teaching junk. People believe in certain situations that simply don't exist. They read the text, and they are blind. They can't understand it. Why? Because they are drunk. They are in a spiritual state. There is evaluated and categorized as drunk. Island of Patmos. Who was the Caesar of the time? Some people not even as much as understanding history. I don't know who was the Caesar of the time. The point is, you are saved in a way. Live your life the way you want, and at the end of it, then you are saved. And they take a portion of the scripture of Yeshayahu, and they read what the prophet said, and then a virgin shall conceive. A virgin shall conceive. Sure, was she a virgin? No, she couldn't bear children because she already had sex with her husband. Previously, Moses said, and then it's going to come after me, then a person from amongst yourselves. Amongst yourselves, what does it mean? Zerah. Incredible. Some of the most obvious writings that they read, and their minds are drunk. So Galah, Revelation. Lot, the wife of Lot, becoming a column of salt. Then what went on in the desert? 40 years walking in the desert. Oh, it gets worse. Then when they left Midian, because they did not go straight from Mitzrayim or Egypt directly to Canaan, they went over there and they spent quite a few years in Midian first. Then a hole in the ground had opened and people went into it. They never stopped to understand, Hur was the name of the guy. Ben-Hur is son of the hole, son of the... When he was a general that Moses had pointed for this particular objective. Now, can't you say that a person is not drunk when reading these mixture of translations and interpretations? Well, the next time we're going to evaluate more of these from the enlightenment of simply reading the translation, reading the originals, and conscientiously understanding with a sober mind. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.